introduce John, and John is actually one of our counselors here at Delta College, so he might look familiar because you might have had him as a counselor and doing some advising. Or you might have him for a social work class because he also teaches a social work class here. And this is Tammy. She's also a faculty member here at Delta. She teaches in the nursing division, so she's upstairs in the F wing with me. And this is Jenna. And Jenna is a former student who graduated from Delta and actually took this course many, many years ago.
I think it was the first course, actually.
It might have been the very first semester that we ever offered the course.
We were down in the basement.
Yeah. And we were down in the basement?
And we were down in the basement.
Oh. Well, we've moved up to the J wing now. So. Yeah, it could have been. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists and just ask them briefly to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about your background. And then after we get, 2 or 3 minutes from each of you, we'll just kind of open it up to questions and discussion about addiction. So John, do you want to start off?
Well, I'm John Brady. I'm a clinical social worker, and I have been a family therapist since 1976. I was with an agency called the Norman Westland Child Guidance Clinic in Saginaw, Michigan, and sort of semi-retired there in 2005. In addition to that, I have a private practice. I do a lot of marriage counseling. Still am active in my private practice, and have had more by default, if you're working with family relationships, marital relationships, you're going to be working with issues of addiction and substance abuse. And so wanted to share with you some of my perspectives on that, and hopefully that will make some sense. And then we're going to do a bit of family sculpting here.
I'm Tammy Ramone, like she said. I'm part of the nursing faculty. I have a disease that's progressive, incurable, and fatal. But the good news is it is treatable. I'm an addict. And I was afraid to mention that and say things about that because of some of the stigma that goes with that, especially being a healthcare professional. But as I'm involved in my recovery, I'm finding that approximately 15% of people that attend a 12-step meeting that I go to are healthcare professionals, and yet we don't talk about it. It's like a hidden thing that we don't discuss, and we are not doing a service to our community and to our profession by not talking about it. Like I said, it's a disease. I'm a diabetic, and for that I've lost a lot of weight. I used to weigh over 300 pounds. I had bariatric surgery, and I exercise every day, and I eat differently. I'm an addict, and there's different ways I can treat that. And it's a disease just like anything else. We don't go up to the diabetic and say, "You piece of crap, you abused your pancreas." But yet we might go up to the alcoholic and say, "You piece of crap, you ruined your liver by drinking." And we may not think of it as a disease. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, is just to be very open about the disease process and what you can do about it, and also looking at it from a healthcare perspective as well.
I'm Jenna. I actually have also worked in the social work field on and off for quite some time now. I currently am accounts receivable for BMW. I deal with all foreign policy. I'm 3 years clean. I'm a heroin addict. I was born addicted to heroin. And it's been a process. I go back and forth, and it's on and off for years now. And I know that I'll never be completely clear of it, but it's something that I deal with on a daily basis. And, even at my worst, I was a very high-functioning addict. I was able to work. I worked at several nonprofits and at Health Source in that time, and no one at the time knew that I was using. And so for me, I think what I bring to the table is that, there's addicts all around you, and you may not know who they are, but they are still there. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Good intro. So, do we want to open it up to questions? Does anybody here have a specific question, or want me to start? No, I see something percolating.
Oh, I'm addicted to nicotine. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Me too.
Chewing's terrible.
So you know what that feeling of addiction is like.
Oh, yeah. And smoked for 5 years, I quit cold turkey, no problem, but chew's been a lot more difficult. I don't know why. I think maybe it's because I can still breathe. And that's primarily why I quit smoking.
Well, maybe let's start with that. Can either Tammy or Jenna, both of you, talk about what does it feel like? I don't have those kind of cravings. So what does it feel like to have that an addiction?
Well, I had about 15 years of abstinence, but what I've learned now is that was not recovery. I still had an addict mind. I thought it was very normal to process everything and what if everything to death, that I would always look at, okay, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? What if that happens? And have option A, B, double Z, Y, X. And that occupied so much of my time and energy. I never realized that normal people didn't do that. So having an obsessive compulsive attitudes. And like I said, even though I had like about 15 years of abstinence between using, when I got pregnant for my daughter, I knew alcoholism ran in my family, so I stopped using drugs. But when I got beat up by a patient and got put on narcotics, that started the whole addiction process, and then I was off to the races. And from one day it came, I don't know when it all changed from using the medication appropriately to abusing. I can't put a date on it. But when I had my bariatric surgery, I knew that there was no way they were going to be able to control my pain with the amount of drugs that I was using. Because I was doctor shopping and I spent a lot of energy. I knew every ER doctor, who was good to go to, when, where, why, what drugstores to go to, what names to get prescriptions in. That took a lot of energy. And I always think of, if I put half that amount of energy in my recovery, that I have a fighting chance. And I too will have about 3 years. 11, 11, 11 is my 3-year clean, my 3-year clean date. And Delta College has been really good working with me, looking at it as a disease. And they, I had to sign a contract saying I would do certain things by certain dates, but they were willing to work with me. Sorry.
Well, for me, I look at my addiction, when I look back at it, and, I'm still an addict, but I look back at it as a relationship. And to me, that was the best relationship that I ever had. It was always there. It never hurt me. At least in my mind at that time, it never hurt me. It didn't cheat on me. It didn't do all these things. And when no one else was there, it was always there. And, I've suffered health consequences. I've damaged my pancreas to the point that I'm a type 1 diabetic now. And numerous other things that have gone along with my addiction. And it took, it wasn't a matter of, okay, let's just stop. For me, it was, I had to break up with it. And I had to leave that part of my life behind. And when they say change the people, places, and things, you have no idea how real that is. I had to go to Arizona to clean up. I'd have periods of clean time when I was here in Saginaw. But it ended up, I'd be clean for 6 months, a year, and then something that was catastrophic in my mind would transpire. And there it was. I knew where to go. I knew who to get it from, and it was always there. And I didn't even have to seek it out, because the people that I associated with were just like, oh, well, here you go. And at a point, it wasn't even about the heroin or the narcotics. It turned into, I just had a problem with sobriety. I could not, if it wasn't one thing, I was using another. I found something because I could not handle myself in a sober state of mind. I felt like I was a better person. I functioned better, when it wasn't the truth. I look back at some of the things that I did, and I've never been more ashamed in my life looking back at that.
If I can just add to what Tammy and Jenna both said, that in my experience, it's a first of all, blame becomes part of the problem. Blame and shame when you're working with folks who are struggling with substance abuse or their families, because what it tends to do is it kind of shifts recognition away from what the real issues are, and so it's very important, I think, to avoid that. So anything I say here today is not about blame; it's more about recognition. Secondly, the complexity of substance abuse is people tend to give advice. You should just stop smoking. Just stop smoking, right? I used to smoke, so I know how hard that is. It's very, very hard. I still have dreams, which I smoked in the dream and I wake up in a panic. It's very, very difficult to do. And that tends to be the simple solution sometimes that extended family members have. They're just going to tell you what to do and then moralize when you don't do it. So I think it's very important that we understand that it's a complex condition and it has a very strong neurochemical component. Some folks we think the percentage is about the same across the board, 3 to 5% of folks who are prone to be addicted, just like you're prone to get kidney disease or diabetes. We think it's about that percent, and that percentage stays fairly stable. And maybe not at this point, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the effect on relationships. And Jenna was saying, I think said it really well, is that when somebody is affected by this disease, it's very difficult for them in their intimate relationships inside their family and inside with their partners, because it creates a shift in the balance of the relationship. If I can take a few minutes and explain this. Up on the board I have, are you familiar with transactional analysis? Everybody here, just by a show of hands? Anybody not familiar with it?
I'm not.
Freudian, you've heard of Freudian? They talk about the personality being superego, which is about a part of us that observes and controls what we do, shouldn't, tells us what we should and shouldn't do. The ego, which is the adult, it's a little different in TA. In TA terms, it's about operating like a digital computer, solving problems. Kids taking a math test are typically in their adult. Not a lot of feeling, not a lot of affect, more focused on problem solving. And then the child ego state, which in Freudian terms would be compared to the id. It contains our feelings, wants, needs, things we're born with. We come into this world, we're needy by nature. We're not needy by character flaw, or babies need to be cared for and nurtured. What happens for folks when they're using, even people who aren't substance abusers? If you go into a bar at 5:30, any of you ever gone to a bar at 5:30 in this group?
Yeah.
You notice progressively the volume level goes up. And part of what's happening is that as people drink, is they're sort of decommissioning their inhibitions, right? So their voice goes louder, they tend to be much more expressive than they might ordinarily be at work or in other social situations. As they continue to drink, they impair. We talk about driving impaired. Truly, they become impaired. Their thinking becomes unclear. Their judgment may not be the best. We know their reflexes may not be the best. And so about 9, 10 o'clock, unless there's dancing or something going on to discharge all that energy, people tend to get quieter and quieter and quieter. And then if you're in a bar about 2 a.m. and there's no music or dancing going on, it almost looks like a group meeting for depressives. We know that alcohol is a depressant. And so what it does, it starts to impair the physiological functioning parts of ourselves. We get sort of immune to what we genuinely feel, what our needs are. And again, unless there's outside stimulation, people can do that. For substance abusers, imbalances in relationships, what can happen is over a long period of time, they end up impairing their that part of them that tells them what they should and shouldn't do, and they end up impairing their ability to function and solve problems in day-to-day world. It's on a continuum, so it's not always severe, and there are a lot of folks who are able to maintain and manage without it being severe. But as it gets, if it's progressive, what tends to happen is they tend to become less functional in terms of their balanced judgment, less functional in terms of their ability to solve problems. And then in relationships, Charissa, there's another diagram up there. I'm just going to. And Jenna and Tammy, if you see this differently, please say so, and I'm trying to make sense out of this in a simple way. What happens in intimate relationships over time sometimes is as the substance abuser becomes less functional in terms of their goal focus, self-control, shouldn'ts, and in terms of their ability to solve problems, that in intimate relationships, those functions can get shifted to their partner. And their partner can become like the super mom, super wife, super husband, who's paying all the bills, watching out for the kids, managing all the household finances, dealing with all the problems. And where the substance abuser, because of their impairment, spends more and more time kind of caught in their substance abuse. That becomes the primary focus of their relationship. And what we know, and the disease may progress for decades even, and what we know is that it tends to impact decision making and perception over periods of time, tend to become more black or white, and oftentimes they become more self-focused as a progression of the disease. In their partnership, their partner, to maintain the balance, then may give up being focused on their own personal needs, on their own personal feelings, because it maintains the balance in the relationship. And then by so doing that, they maintain the relationship, but the over-functioning partner kind of loses focus on their own needs, wants, desires, and feelings. And this is all very subtle, typically, in terms of relationships. It occurs over a long period of time, and it may be only when it gets really, really extreme that the non-abusing, non-drinking, non-using partner starts to realize that they're caught in this kind of pattern where their needs aren't being met or where they're not being treated in a balanced, equal way.
Usually it's gone too far at that point. It's great to look from the outside in and you can say, well, you can stop enabling her at any time. It's a lot easier said than done. I personally did not have a long-going relationship at that time. I was trying to hide what was going on in my life. I didn't want to open up and share that. The boyfriend that I currently have, we've dated on and off for about 11 years now. And at that time, it was still, you could see the dynamics of that situation where he was trying to care for me. And finally, he did the best thing that he could for me and said enough is enough and walked away. And now that I'm clean, he's been able to, reassess the situation. But at that time, I was too far gone for him to, keep sacrificing himself in order to keep me at least moderately content. When nothing he could do at that time would make me content.
And I did have a long-standing relationship. I've been married for 20 years. My husband, we went through a really stressful time when I first got clean because he loved to take care of me. And not only did he have to deal with the new clean me, I had a whole new bunch of friends. I didn't isolate. I wanted to go do things. Plus, I had all the weight loss going on all at the same time. So I lost 154 pounds. I got clean. I was active. I didn't want to go out to eat. That wasn't something fun to do for me anymore. I didn't want to go to the casino, which is something that we used to do. And so here, my whole life had changed, and everybody would make me comments, oh, you must just love this. No, he didn't love the new me. And it was very, very stressful. And I spent a lot of time talking about it in counseling because my counselor feels that most relapses are relationship-based. And he was, really concerned about that. And I said, I've got to give him a chance. We've been together for 17, 18 years, and we've had ups and downs in our relationship. This is a big change. I need to give him some time. And, I offered him some 12-step programs. He didn't want to go because he didn't have a problem. I couldn't make him go. And he didn't want to go to events that I would go to. And I think what he thought is I wouldn't go if he didn't go. Wrong. And I had to set some limitations, like I am going to go to this many meetings a week. I will not be involved in this activity because it's over 4th of July and we do this as a family. So I had to set some limits because if I don't put my recovery first, then everything else falls down. And I had to kind of lay the land, and there's still some jealousy issues that arise, but he's getting more used to it now. We're going through another big change because I'm going to be having surgery in December, And I noticed over the last month or so, he's getting really snippy and cantankerous, and I ask him what's wrong. Nothing. Well, I think he's having some anxiety about the surgery. He doesn't want, this is going to change my looks again. Or is something going to happen with the surgery? Am I going to use over it? I don't know what's going on in his mind. I'm just guessing because I don't know. I don't know what your relationships are like, but my husband doesn't like to talk about feelings. We have this saying in this 12-step program I'm in, hocus pocus, change the focus, because it's all about, it's all about feelings. And I didn't want to feel. And so I would take this drug to feel this way, this drug to feel that way, that drug to feel that way. I didn't know how to have feelings. And that was one of the really big things during early recovery was there were so many emotions that I didn't know how to deal with. I didn't know how to express. I didn't even know how I felt. I couldn't even put words to it. It's very stunning and baffling.
And to go off of that, you were talking about the emotions. Mine was, it was the one thing, the one aspect of my life at that time that I could control. Everything else was a variable. That was the constant. And that, losing that control for me was just absolutely devastating. I've never felt comfortable in a 12-step program. I think, personally, this is my view on it, I feel that it minimizes and maximizes experience, and who am I to say that your experience isn't as, important as mine. So it took a lot of one-on-one counseling. And it was mostly self-determination because, I didn't want to be on opiate blockers. I ended up on them when I came back to Michigan because just so that I knew I couldn't get high. That was my safeguard because if I'm taking an opiate blocker and I go to get high, I'm just going to get sick. I didn't encounter that actually. It was really nice. It was a smooth progress. But I found that, the 12-step programs for me were just not functional. And for some people, they're fantastic. They do great things for some people. Other people, I just am not one for them. And yeah.
I got a question for maybe John can answer, but what's the cycle of addiction? How does it relate to recovery?
Well, I think they're sharing a lot of different parts of it here. First of all, it's very complicated. It's not simple, and as we all said at the outset, it doesn't lend itself to somebody telling you what to do or not to. I also agree with what Jenna said about all of us are unique, and there's no one way to impact on people, and so it's sort of the struggle we have in America is we like to make things black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, and this is a very complicated, has a physiological component, has a strong social component, and what Tammy was saying about, it's a systems issue. The system induces sort of, and it's very hard to describe in American terms because we tend to think of single actors, single, responsibility, and that is not how it is. What Tammy was describing in terms of people, if you struggle with that and then you suddenly become sober and more whole, more available to your feelings, and if you're the dad in the family and now you're being a dad, instead of being sort of off to the side, that may create some. The kids may prefer you when you were drinking because you were a lot more fun, at least for some of the day. You may wake up grouchy by noon. You're going to buy them a brand new bike. And by 5 o'clock you're tired, and by midnight you go to bed and you wake up grouchy and the whole cycle starts over again. So it's a very complicated phenomenon. And I think that the way out, and hopefully none of the things I'm saying sound like blame or discount anybody who has a substance abuse, because I sure don't see it that way. The way out is, first of all, recognition. And it's recognition by not just the person who's defined as a user, it's recognition by really the whole family but especially I think by the partner. You know, the other thing I want to say about intimate relationships, because I'll tell you, I mean, I've been doing marriage counseling. I'm married to a divorce attorney, by the way. So,
Do you refer clients to
yeah.
each other?
I've been doing marriage counseling for over 30 years, and one of the things that trumps everything, in my experience, is love. It trumps everything. And so when people tell the non-using partner, you should leave him, you should leave him, you know, they're not ready to. And I have seen and known people who literally, who are addicted, who are literally saved by the love of their life. And how can you moralize about that? You know what I mean? Somebody was willing to be flexible, bend over, and it's not about pathology. It's about understanding what's going on, and then looking at what your choices are and seeing that you have choices. The classic thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think for family systems and marriage systems is everybody feels powerless. Right? Do you agree? And
Well,
they
it's-
feel trapped.
Not to say that the 12-step programs don't work, but the group sense is what I was more saying, because those steps, like admitting that you have a problem and admitting that you're powerless, those are very real parts of everyday addiction. You have to do that or you're not going to progress.
I just think I agree with you, though. I think
Yeah.
different people do it differently, and you know, sometimes people are sober and then they fail. You know, I don't know that that's a real failure. I think they've gone through a period of time, and that they really do learn from period to period. And the 12-step program is not for everybody. I tend to be more of a solution-focused person where I'm working with people. I'm looking for, okay, why did it work? How did it work that time? I'm trying to build on that. And the same is true when working with family systems that are affected by the substance issues. It creates probably the most power. I don't know, but the biggest thing it creates is a sense of powerlessness over your existence and over your direction. And when people feel powerless, they get sort of rigid.
You saying that the addiction creates the powerlessness for them?
Well,
Others.
it's a very hardy condition.
I know it's not a blanket.
Yeah, it's a very hardy condition, meaning that it's complicated. You can't just snap your fingers.
And I think that perhaps with my parents' substance abuse is where my control issues came from, is because for so long when I was so young, I had that constant feeling of powerless. I never knew what was going to happen each night, you know, and so as I got older, my substance abuse was about being able to control what was going on in my life, even though when I was using, after I had used, it was a blur 90% of the time. But I think that perhaps, and I'm not 100% sure, perhaps that's where some of it originated. I mean, I was born addicted to heroin. Back in the 80s, they didn't do the drug testing that they do now on infants. I went under the radar, and then when I got sick, they took me back to the hospital. I got put on morphine and methadone on and off up until almost I was a year old. After my mom recently passed away, and so I was able to get those medical records after she passed. And I wonder why it was allowed to progress, but you know, it definitely has impacted me now. It was like when the first time I did heroin, it was like, oh, dear friend, I've known you so long. But I had never done it before myself. And so I think that it put me at almost a predisposition to having that problem. Whereas, you know, someone might like, say, take a Vicodin, per se, and, you know, they don't have that pre-existing. I don't know if that exists. I mean, in my mind, it makes sense.
It's more for Tammy in general, but like coming out of your addictions when you were in recovery, I know that like the people you surround yourself when you're an addict and you have that substance abuse, and then the people you want to surround yourself with after and you're trying to recover, what was that like? Because like going from having one set of friends to trying to stay away from them because they're not people you want to hang out with because you're trying to recover. How'd you do that?
That's a great question. For me, that's where the real 12-step program was very helpful. And I am a 12-stepper person, but I have to say my little disclaimer statement, I don't represent a 12-step program. No one person does. But for me, it gave me a group of people. It gave me a place to go. It gave me something to do.
To get away from the other people.
Exactly. Well, I isolated.
Oh, okay.
I didn't use with other people. I isolated. But I embraced myself and got really, really involved. I got involved with service work. I go to Midland County Jail and bring meetings into the jail. One of my goals was to be published by the time I was 50. Be careful what you wish for, because I always thought it would be in a professional journal, not a 12-step program literature, but that's where it's going to be. So, you know, I was on the literature chair committee and did stuff like that. Now I'm the treasurer for the Saginaw Bay area, so I got really, really involved with service. And part of that is I turned myself in order to maintain my license. I'm in the health professional recovery program. And I have to go to 12-step meetings. I have to go to 3 meetings a week. I have to call Monday through Friday. I have it programmed in my phone, 1-800-GO-PEE. I have it programmed in there that I have to call Monday through Friday to see if I have to drop. And it's one of the reasons why I'm having surgery in December, because my release date is January 12th, and I want to have my surgery while I'm still being monitored as a safety feature for myself. So that was a big part for me, was finding, I didn't have friends. I didn't have friends when I used, I isolated.
Your friends were the chemicals
Yep.
versus flesh and blood.
And I stayed away from people. I really distanced people, men and women, wanted nothing to do with them. And I didn't have a problem when I came to the program either.
Right.
I just got caught.
I left. I got on a plane and went to Arizona. I knew, I finally had realized that here in Saginaw I was in over my head. That, I had tried to clean up. I kept trying to clean up, and then when it got to the point that I was using a gram and a half of heroin a day, like almost $300-400 of heroin, I realized that this has to stop. And so my dad lives in Arizona, and as much as it pained me to go out there with him, I went out there. I didn't know anyone, so I did the opposite. I isolated and established my sobriety, and then went out into the community and started establishing relationships again. And then there are people from my past that I still do talk to, people that I will always care about, but I know that I can't hang out with them. I can send them a Facebook message, I can, get an email from them here and there, but I know the minute that I hang out with them, like they call me up or say, hey, you're in town, let's go hang out, and it's like a red flag going up, because I know. It leads from that, and then we get to bitching about our lives, and from there it's let's go get high. And I avoid that at all costs. I'll have impersonal relationships with them as opposed to really divulging myself in their lives.
I think one of the most difficult relationships for me was my relationship with my brother, because he's an independent drug rep. You can put your own little spin on that. And my dad is an alcoholic. He quit drinking when my daughter was born. And it was very normal when I was growing up. We would go driving around in the country on a Sunday afternoon when I was like 10 or 12, and he'd have his 40-ouncer between his legs. And my brother and I would be driving the car. That was like a normal Sunday afternoon for us. And so that's what I grew up with, was substances. And he went to work every day. He never beat us. He wasn't mean. I had a very, what I would call, stable home. So I thought to use substances was normal. And then when I got in high school, he would buy for me. Just make sure that, if the cops catch you, you tell them that you dropped your dad off at the bar. That was just, that's how I grew up. It was just part of life. And having to end my relationship with my brother and put some boundaries on that relationship. He can come over to my house, but he knows at my house he can't use. And recently my mom started using. And I was at their house to see my dad, and she asked me if I wanted a substance. And I said, looked at her, and I'm like, she goes, well, you're on vacation, because you can take vacations from drops for a reason. And I was teaching a bunch of classes a couple weeks, so I asked for a vacation. She goes, well, you're on vacation from HPRP. And I said, I'm not on vacation for my recovery ever. I said, and do you think I'm going to start using when I'm done? I'm like, don't you want me well? And I didn't wait for the answer. I just left. And that's been really hard, is to break some of those relationships.
Oh, I totally agree. Up until my mother's death, she was using fairly hard, fairly heavy. Although, given the circumstances, she had pancreatic cancer, and so it was, it was a balance of she's taking her physical pain and her emotional pain into account. My brother today was just admitted into rehab. When my mom passed, I had talked with both my parents prior to and said, well, I'll keep an eye out, and that's probably him, sorry. I'll keep an eye out on him, and then when it came down to it, I cannot take on that burden. And I hate to call him that, but he has no intention of getting clean. He does not want that for himself, and I have a new baby at home. I just cannot do that. And so basically I've left him out here with no family, no nothing. And if he wants to make the decision to get clean, my door is open. But if he's going to come to my house and bring that stuff into my house, I will have him arrested.
And hearing this, I mean, I'm just totally impressed with that you are, it's such a difficult thing. It's such a difficult challenge.
I would just like to share a story with you. I do have a neck injury from being beat up with the patients, by that patient, so I still sometimes have to take medication, which has been a big challenge. And what I do is I don't have the medication in my possession. Well, it was really wonderful when my daughter was living with us because she's an RN and I couldn't bullshit her or talk her into anything. I didn't want my husband to control because I knew I could manipulate him at any given moment. So when she moved out, my husband had it. And one day he told me that he thought I was having too much pain, and if I didn't take something, he was going to grind it up and put it in my food. Wow. I called 911 and filed a police report.
Oh my.
Because if I showed up a positive drop to HBRP, that would lose my license, and I wanted it on record. And I'm like, I am not messing around with this.
Yeah.
I am not fucking with you. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm kind of, can we?
Beat that out.
Okay.
Sorry.
Tammy, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you avoid solitude?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because that's a trigger for me.
Right, I thought so.
I found it took me a while to learn that there's a difference between serenity and being by myself and isolating. And it took a while for me to do that because I have a problem with balance. Most addicts do. What's enough? I never knew. I never had enough work, enough food, enough anything, enough pair of shoes.
You mentioned earlier that you have OCD as well, right?
Don't we all?
I think so.
I think it's part of that addictive personality.
We're also mathematicians.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We are very intelligent people because we find ways and means to get more when we have no means. And your bottom is whenever you stop digging. And I am very grateful that I got caught because I didn't lose my house. I never did drugs when I was taking care of patients. I didn't divert drugs from patients yet. Yet means you're entitled to. Where would my disease have progressed to? Would I went to that point? I think so. I didn't lose my house. There are people who are far less, that lose a lot more. But your bottom is whenever you choose to stop digging. And I feel very grateful. And I remember I told you when I first got into HPRP, I just got caught and didn't have a problem. I was at my 4th or 5th NA meeting and, the 12-step meeting. And I had the second meeting I went to. There was somebody that was talking about selling their body for drugs, stuff like that. And I was listening to the messenger more than the message.
Mm-hmm.
Not looking at, did I compromise my morals? Absolutely. Did I do things that I normally wouldn't do? Absolutely. But I was looking at just that piece. Then there was this person, he happened to be a biker dude, and he was talking about the jerk sitting at the bar who could have one beer. And I could relate to that because I would binge drink 3 to 4 times a year. I would drink till I oblivion until I could drink no more. He was talking about buying ice cream sandwiches and eating the whole box. Well, I told you I weighed well over 300 pounds. I could relate to that. And I was like, holy crap, that's me. And that's when my mind started to open up, well, maybe I do have a problem.
And addiction can take any shape or form. An addict can turn something positive into something negative, something that you, like, I'll use, for example, church. People can go to church and be okay with it, but an addict will become a zealot and, you know, just shove it down your throat because they have to move from one thing to another to keep themselves occupied because dealing with themselves is too much of an inconvenience, I suppose.
Or too painful.
Too painful, inconvenience, like they don't want to do that. I'm lost the words.
There's
Sorry.
a question over here. Go
I was
ahead.
actually wondering if you could be okay if I contributed.
Sure.
I'm a friend of Jenna's.
Of course.
I'm a recovering
Yeah.
alcoholic.
Of course.
addict.
Go ahead.
Come on over.
Put another table up there.
Yeah.
I didn't come here planning to talk, but I feel like I definitely contributed.
No, go ahead, introduce yourself.
My name's Patrick. I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict. I'm an active member of 12-step program. And in response to your question about changing your friends and places, a lot of times you'll find that when you get sober, people that you were friends with before don't want to be your friends anymore.
Right.
Because that's, you know,
You're not in the
yeah, you'll
group
find in those
anymore.
relationships that the main thing you had in common was alcohol and drugs and addiction. Yeah, and once you get sober, a lot of them don't want to have anything to do with you. But also a lot of addicts are really socially awkward. They use drugs and alcohol as a social lubricant. So once you get sober, you need to learn how to function with people again before you can make new friends. And like I said, I'm a member of a 12-step group, and that's one thing we work on a lot is learning how to be a member of society and to function sober.
For those people that aren't familiar with the 12-step program, is there any of you that could pop them off? Tammy, are you that good?
I can tell you. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless
Some of our addiction.
over our addiction, and our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2 came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3 made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory. Step 5 admitted our faults to God, to ourselves, and to another. Step 6 became willing to have God remove all these character defects. Step 7 humbly asked Him to remove these defects of character. Step 8 made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make an amends to them. Step 9 made direct amends to those people whenever possible, except when to do so would harm them or others.
Step 10, we continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, we made a conscious contact to improve our
Saw through prayer and
meditation to improve our conscious contact with our God of our understanding. And 12,
having had a spiritual awakening, continue to practice these principles in all our affairs.
all our affairs.
And now,
Powerful stuff. I'll just to add, because I've known people who are sponsors in AA, and wow, some of the most incredible people I've ever met as far as being able to, dedicate themselves to helping other folks and really knowing what to say and what to do.
Being a sponsor is very difficult. I have 3 sponsees, one who recently relapsed, and you can carry the message, but you can't carry the addict. And, sponsorship is really, really important and part of the 12-step program. That's somebody that you feel like you can share stuff with that kind of helps walk you through the 12 steps, because there are certain things that you don't want to share at the table. Anything that you don't want published in the Bay City Times or Saginaw News, you really shouldn't share at the table. So there are some things that we may want to share with just one individual. And so that's kind of what a sponsor is for.
And see, with me, I have definite issues of trust. And so I like that little HIPAA binder that said that they can't go publish it in the Saginaw Times, because that was one of the aspects, is that it made me extremely uncomfortable, because I didn't know you from you, we all come and it's anonymous, and that didn't make me comfortable. I wanted, someone that, I guess, in a professional aspect could help me sit down and pinpoint what routes I could take, because as with most addicts, there are typically underlying mental conditions, and I personally have borderline personality disorder, which maybe makes me like I should probably have a Zap collar, because my thought process sometimes gets completely obscured. In the past, I have loved to live the life on a roller coaster, ups and downs, and that's what fueled me to keep going. But that's why I like the treatment plan that's more personalized, as opposed to, because they went to college. They're, in some sense, in my mind at least, they were better equipped to help me. And many of them have gone through it. Oh, I think the best therapist has even a better therapist.
Well, I think that the interesting thing about the 12-step program is that it is one of the long-term success stories for a lot of people in terms of addiction and recovery.
Well,
and I was just going to say, we've all had our own personal, probably, experience with addiction in one way or another, whether it's your own person or within your family. And I lived with an alcoholic for 2 years, who I didn't even know was an alcoholic. I lived with this person, and I didn't even know was an alcoholic because of how tricky they can be. But when they started to go through recovery, I started learning about the 12 steps, and I, picked up, my educated self picked up the book and said, what's in here that's, and I read the blue book, and I read another blue book, and then another book. And really, the 12 steps are just 12 sound steps for anybody who wants a healthy, balanced life. Mm-hmm. And the people that, that's why I think the 12 steps are successful for an awful lot of people. And some people, maybe it doesn't work for everybody, and the people that have a problem with it maybe have a problem with the fact that there's a higher power in every statement.
And not only that, but the group aspect. In mine, I think that it's a great foundation. I've used it with clients when I was working at different places. I think it's a great foundation, but I personally think that it should be a little bit more personalized. It's very obscure. It can fit any circumstance, but when you're dealing with someone that's so down, so broken, by personalizing the therapy or the treatment just a little bit, it helps them put it into perspective.
What do you think about just the counseling aspect of the 12 steps, John, or just the overall health balance?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said. It's the most effective approach, because I think it's such a personal decision to decide. It's within that person has to decide. And Tammy was kind of talking about that. Has to break your heart when one of your sponsees decides to go in a direction that is not good for them, because it's such a personal. So you can be smart, you can know all there is to know, you can have been down that same road, but that person has to make that decision.
To me, recovery is like a toolbox. I don't just have a hammer in my toolbox. I'm not going to be able to build anything. The more tools that I have, the more likely I am going to be able to build a recovery. And my recovery has been built around an addictionist, a social worker that I see on a regular basis. I had to go to group for 2 years. I have to go to Caduceus, which is medical professionals, once a month, plus the 12-step program. So it wasn't just one thing. And even within the 12 steps, do I write on the steps? Do I work them in my life? Or do I just go to meetings and sit there? Do I contribute? Do I sponsor? Do I have a sponsor? There's a lot of different layers, and the more I do, if I do half of what I did using, half the effort, then like I said, I have a fighting chance. Because I spent a lot of time and effort on that.
And I think-
and Charisse was talking about, you can be addicted to good things. I was addicted to exercise when I first got into recovery. I mean, I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and exercise before my husband got up for work, and then he would wake me up and I'd exercise again. I was exercising like 6 hours a day and obsessed with that. I went obsessed with weighing myself. And I figured out that was because that was a concrete number I could look at. Recovery wasn't. There was nothing concrete. Yeah, there was nothing concrete that I could measure. But if I stood on the scale, that was a number that I could look at. And work. When I taught 33 credits one semester. 30 is a full load for a whole year. So
Who let you do that?
Their name shall not remain.
Good idea.
Yeah, but I was like almost 3 people last year. So I know how to do too much of a good thing. Yeah. I'm very good at that, in replacing one thing for another. I'm just much quicker at recognizing it now.
Again, I think the 12-step program is probably the most effective way to approach it. But that key thing is that person has to make that decision, and that have to be at a very painful point in their life. Things have to be pretty bad, first of all, to weigh on the knife point which way you're going to go.
We had 2 newcomers at a meeting this morning, and we always say, you probably didn't come in here because your life's going really great. You don't just wake up one day and go, oh, I think I'm going to go to a 12-step meeting today because I don't have anything to do. Usually you have to be pretty desperate and pretty sore means to get there.
For the first time.
For the first time.
I personally, the saying rehab is for quitters, well, it really is. Prior to this recovery, I had been to rehab. Well, I'd been to medical detox about 14 times, and then long-term rehabs 8 times, from the time I was 13 on up to I was 22 the last day. So, and yeah, I'd come out, I'd be clean for a little while, but then I was getting thrown right back into that environment in which had produced, well, not so much, but helped produce the monster that I was at that time.
Jenna, who paid for all of that? That's a lot of
my parents' health insurance, and then my aunt and uncle also paid for some out of pocket. It was my mom at the time had worked at Dow, and then my dad also worked at GM, and so, I got shipped off to little cozy retreats, and it just taught me how to be smarter 90% of the time and not get caught.
Well,
I spent $5,000 peeing in a cup the first year.
That's a very common thing for people to go into treatment over and over again. And just the disease of alcoholism in the United States each year, it costs more to treat alcoholism than diabetes and cancer.
Very expensive disease. So I kind of want to bring socioeconomic status into it just a little bit. And then I'll share part of my personal story is I have 2 brothers who are addicts. One of which has been an addict for probably 40-some years now. When you spend 40 years of your life being an addict, and he's never been in rehab that I know of, and hasn't really made the decision to quit using, he's tried to make that decision, but he just doesn't have the money. So he actually started using when he was in high school. And, I'm the oldest, so I kind of knew things were going on. And I told my parents, I said, Tony really has a problem. He needs to go to rehab. And my dad looked at me and he said, who's going to pay for it? I'm not going to pay for it. And I said, well, if he doesn't get rehab now, it's only going to be worse as he gets older. And, my parents didn't think it was that big a deal or whatever, or didn't know really what was going on. And so he was actually selling in high school. How he got his money to use. And then, when he graduated, it just got worse from there. He actually ended up, his first job was in Bolivia, South America. Mm-hmm. Talk about being, selling and a user. And so he was down there for a couple years, and then, he came back, and he's always been the one in the family that had the toughest personality to get along with in terms of everybody else. And so he didn't, came back to Ohio and then moved immediately almost to California and has been out there ever since. So it's almost like out of sight, out of mind, but not really, because every once in a while now, over the years, mostly what happens to him now, is that he gets caught with drugs or for now traffic tickets and thrown in jail. And he spends time in jail, gets clean. I think he can get clean in jail.
Sometimes.
I don't know.
Not necessarily.
And comes out and goes through the cycle again because his work is that he's a flooring guy. So he lays carpet and he lays tile and he's very, very good and he's a very, very hard worker. He's got a huge heart. He's got a mega extroverted personality. He's this wonderful guy, but he's a drug addict. And he ends up in jail over and over and over again. He goes in, he comes out, he goes in, he comes out. And he can't make enough money. He doesn't have any health care insurance, okay? He has not filed with the IRS in probably 20 years, so he doesn't exist in the United States because he gets paid under the table for everything. So where is he going to go now? Where is he going to go? Where is he going to go for health care insurance? How is he going to get treated? Where is he going to go for rehab? Where is he going to go for treatment? What's he going to do next?
And a lot of times what I've found, even especially at working at Health Source, they'll either pay for the rehab or they'll pay for the medical detox. And medical detox, you can't go to a rehab without having a safe medical detox. And so it's you're covering 3 days of medical detox and then throwing clean addicts out on the streets. And they're not going to stay clean in time, in the 30 days that it's going to take them to recycle and get put into a long-term treatment facility. And so it's not effective in any means.
And socially, it's one of the costs of moralizing, making it bad behavior, quote-unquote bad behavior. So people don't provide enough resources because they think it's a moral issue, not a neurological. They just don't see it for what it really is.
See, now, there are programs, the 12-step programs don't cost anything.
Yeah, I mean, he could go to 12-step meetings, but then his job, he works like paycheck to paycheck, it's hand to mouth. Like, that's how he eats. He goes to work, he gets to eat. He doesn't go to work, he doesn't get
See, many people do need that detox at first, just to get it out of their system, get their head clear before they can make a decision where they want to go from there.
But the problem with that is a lot of times they put you on things that are just as addictive. Methadone is terrible. Methadone is just as bad as heroin. Suboxone and naltrexone, and I've read recently about a medication called Ibogaine, but FDA is not putting funds into it. Basically, it's a one-time dose, and you will not experience the cravings that you were previously craving, but the FDA won't sink money into that. But like methadone just creates methadone addicts. It's it's recycling. It's replacing one addiction with another, and it's not cheap. It costs money, and when you send someone to a methadone clinic, they're getting this amount. Well, as opposed to going down in the doses, they go up, and they just keep going up. And so instead, they're getting their fix from the clinic.
Yeah, so if you don't have access to resources, really, if you don't have access to resources, you can walk into a 12-step meeting for free. But if you're working and the job that you work is a 14-hour day and you have to drive across LA to get there and then drive home at night and you get home at 9:30 at night after working on, you cannot schedule a 12-step meeting into your life. So there's lots of folks out there with no access to resources and a very difficult way out. I'm not saying,
go to, there's a
There's a will, there's a way, but
you have to want it.
And if you look at the time that most people put in their drug use and drinking, it comes nowhere close to the hours that you put in recovery and meetings and reading.
I mean, we're very fortunate in this area. We have usually 3 meetings a day in Saginaw, Bay City, and Midland. 3 in each place. So that's 9 meetings that we have available, and that's just in one 12-step program. It's huge.
Jenna, would you talk a little bit more about your early childhood with 2 addicted parents?
Well, my mom was the primary caregiver in our home. It was on and off. It depends how work was going. When she was 26, she had a stroke. as a result to a heart defect, which she could no longer work because she had no left side peripheral vision at that point. But my dad was in the service, and when he was home, they were fighting. I remember being 3 or 4 and calling the cops on them, higher than kites, out in the front yard, just beating each other. My mom had, I think, a frying pan. My dad was hitting her with his fist. And, I'm 3 years old standing in the window watching it. And it was almost like I did not exist. I remember probably by the time I was 5 or 6, I could draw up a heroin needle because my dad was too lazy to do it himself. He would boil it, he'd do the lighter, and then he'd hand it to me because his hands were shaky because he was detoxing, and my hands were nice and stable. And so, and then they'd fight, and then they'd get even higher, and then they'd pass out, and, by the time I was 5 or 6, I was taking care of myself, and then my brother came along, and I was his parent. From the time he was born up until Child Protective Services removed us in '99, and we went to foster care for a period of time. And so I was there every day. I made sure he was bathed. I have older brothers, half-brothers. Fortunately enough, they weren't there for that experience. Their mom left my dad at that time. But I can remember walking on cigarette butts and, little beer tops, like the metal ones, because that's what my dad would cook his heroin in. And so it was just normalized. And then I'd go to people's houses that didn't do that, and I'm like, wait, what's going on here? And then by the time I was in my teenage years, my mom had gotten clean for a period of time, and then she started having migraines. And so she would count her pills. And then she would accuse me of taking them. And so it got to a point that I'm like, whatever, I'll just take them and sell them at school. I had no, if you're going to accuse me, I might as well do it. She constantly was trying to be my friend. When she was not passed out, she was not an authoritative figure. I ran the roads from the time I was, 11, 12. I was young, and I was out there doing what teenagers were doing. And it wasn't until, CPS started showing up at our door that it was even questioned. When I was 13, the electricity got shut off, and we lived in squalor, complete squalor, for about 2 months, and then finally they came and took us away because she was great at manipulating people. Oh, she told that caseworker, we'll have it back on tomorrow. Well, I'm not going to be here, so you can't come to the house and check. And so we just lived that way. It was normalized. I knew at a point, because my mom comes from a relatively affluent family, I knew that it wasn't right because I could compare and contrast, but it was normalized to me. And I look at our family history, and there are so many individuals in my mom's side alone, not even looking at my dad's side, in my mom's side, I'd say 85% of the people in the family have substance abuse issues. And they were too concerned with themselves to reach out and, assist. Because we were being neglected medically, emotionally, and to some extent physically. And they were too concerned with themselves to reach out and do that. And I still hold a grudge. I've kind of come to peace, especially since my mom passed away, with what transpired with her. I was very bitter for a very long time. I blamed her for all that's happened in my life. And I know now that it's not. For a period of time, I refused to let her see my son. I withheld him. And that didn't do anything but hurt both of them. And at that point, she was already diagnosed with the cancer. And that was not something that I wanted to continue to do. I tried, well, Mom, you're going to beat this, because she did technically beat the cancer. And so it was a lot of motivation through that. I got her into therapy. Substance abuse kind of got really crazy there at the end. But she was also septic, and so she was like hallucinating and whatnot, and so we couldn't differentiate, well, is it the substances or is it what is going on? So we actually had to petition her, and this was like the 4th or 5th time that she had been petitioned for psych evals. And and it just turned out, eventually that it was the infection, but that was something that was normalized to me. Oh, she went off the handle again. She's just lost her mind, and time for me to, make a quick exit. And, my dad, he left. I was about 6 years old, and he just disappeared. Been very bitter. He's a chauvinist. He's now on meth. He's went from just smoking pot to heroin to now he's full-blown meth addict. He lives in capital Arizona, and I was out there for a while, and that was not something that I saw the day that I got off the plane, what it did to my dad, and I'm like, oh, there's my motivation to stay clean, because I will not end up like that. We do not have a relationship. He thinks that he's the center of everyone's world, and I very calmly, well, not very calmly, but I let him know that he's not. I'm kind of assertive like that, and I can't have respect for parents that weren't parents, that were just there. And I've come to peace with my mom, but my dad, I still definitely am very bitter and resentful towards.
And what a powerful story of survival in an environment where really life and death is almost every day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very powerful.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
No
really. Yes.
John, we have 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Is that
I
time
think
to do
I'm
this?
just kind of in honor of the intensity. I think
Okay,
I'll
so
hold
then,
on. What I wanted
if you guys want to have final words,
Yeah.
that would be a good way to finish up.
I just wanted to add something. I put to Jenna because, and Jenna said several things that really touch I think a strong role reversal. Kids come into the world, they're needy by nature. They need food, clothing, shelter, affection. The younger they are, the more needy they are, the more dependent they are, the more their parents are the most powerful person in the world. Your parents are 10 foot tall when you're 1 year old.
They're God.
They're God. And from a human standpoint, what we need when we're very young and very vulnerable is we need somebody to be there to take care of us and to provide for our needs. When that doesn't happen, either by neglect, there's nobody there, or even worse, what's there is toxic or abusive or life-threatening. What happens is that kids, they just can't stand around and say, well, blah, blah, blah. It's not a neutral event. It's a meaningful event. And
It pushes you. It's like the flight or flight almost. Because
exactly. Kids have to make decisions for their physical survival, emotional survival, social survival, and as you might imagine, they don't have a lot of resources to make decisions. They can't pack up and leave, until you go to kindergarten. Your whole world is your family, and so they make the best decisions they can make to survive. And from not from necessarily the genetic neuropsychological component, but from the social component, the sad thing I think about addiction is that it tends to recreate itself, and that people who are uncomfortable being in their everyday life, and kids who experience those kinds of things are uncomfortable living their everyday life. They don't know what dad's going to be like. As I said, at 3 o'clock he's buying you a bike. At 5 o'clock he's calling you a little son of a bitch. And he wakes up in the morning and doesn't remember doing any of that. And
I personally have made it, I have not always been the best mother, but I have made it a personal mission that my addiction will never be exposed to my children. At some point in time, I do think that it's imperative to tell them, but when they're much older. I don't think that it's important for them to see. My son is almost 7 years old and has never seen me drink a beer. He's never seen me, because I remember what went through my mind when that happened, and I will not expose them to that. And I guess that's at periods of time I was absent because, my substance abuse, but my son was taken care of at that time. And I hope to never revisit that situation.
And the counterbalance, and this is such a nebulous thing, but I really think the counterbalance for a lot of folks who've gone through that is love, is establishing a relationship with somebody who sees you as being worthwhile and important. That's a boyfriend, girlfriend, or finally your parent. Because I know some folks who've been able to work it back through with their parents and come to some, it doesn't take away what happened, but come to some connectedness that feels significant to them.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest counterbalance in my experience. As I said, love trumps everything in my experience. No matter what's going on in the relationship, if somebody's truly there and persistent, it seems to trump everything.